Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the Greatest Profession Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Asciutto, and this is part 2 of my conversation with Jess Trichel. If you missed it last week, I would suggest kind of jumping back into the previous episode just to kind of learn who Jess Trichel is and why we're talking about the things we're talking about. But this episode is more about the business philosophies and the wide view about corporations within the industry, and two big pieces: what is happening with the industry, as well as how we as individuals kind of navigate through it. There's a lot more to it as well, but just as a kind of a bigger umbrella, I would call this business and personal values. The episode. So this episode, there's kind of a lot. It's not to say that it's a dense episode by any means, but there are business philosophies and references to people and books and their philosophies that we just kind of, we touch on and then move right past into something else entirely. So, for me, I had to kind of stop and take notes of all this stuff and look up a lot of it later, which you might have to do, or you might have to listen to it a couple of times. If you go to the website, thegreatestprofession.com or tgppod.com, underneath her episode, there's going to be a list of basically these topics, and just so you can kind of have some reference there. I want you to just be aware. You might have to stop. Pull the car over. Pull it over. Pull the car over. I got to take notes. Red threads. Okay, let's go. I'm not sure who you're talking to. Like, are you taking an Uber to work? Is that what's happening? And if so, why did you need them to pull over? Like, do you get car sick while writing in the car? Can you just not write while looking out the window? Like, do you have to look at the paper to know that you're writing like A, B, C? You know what I mean? So I find it flawed. Why did you need them to pull over? I think that was a power move on your part. That wasn't necessary. So with all that said, here's part 2 of my conversation with Jess Trichel.
What I wouldn't give to be one of the chosen few, and if not, a shade of green would be my chosen hue. You want me around, I'm eager, smart, and fun. Your extern is here, Matt Asciutto is the one. I hope that this sounds alright. Hope that the spit is tight. Fly like a rainbow kite. Yeah.
I will say, so I just talked to somebody yesterday, and like one of the things that we talked about was kind of like the influence of corporations and corporate medicine on like the field as a whole, and like this sort of like mismatch between what is happening on that level, like within the boardrooms and on the balance sheets and things like that, versus like how it is impacting like the veterinarians in the hospital on the floor itself. So like, I mean, from your, like, given your experience, because like you said, I mean, you've gone to all of these different conferences and talked to all these different peoples, and it's not, and you were at Live Oak in this capacity, and like you worked for another big company that effectively was kind of like that, had elements of that kind of corporate medicine piece to it and all of that. I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts on that? Which we can cut out or add in or whatever. I'm just
No, for sure. It's fascinating right now. I find myself, I feel like a spy right now, not intentionally, but so I've been out of practice for a very long time, working in the industry side and the profession side, and obviously very plugged into the profession and kind of, again, the 30,000 foot problems, and then again, and working on the small business side, and then seeing the corporate consolidation, which was fascinating, having worked at the bank, and the bank obviously worked in other industries where consolidation had happened. And so it was a very kind of, there's a predictable pattern that happens when an industry is consolidating. And so kind of watching that trajectory happen too, and kind of follow the script really. And then working on the other side and actually being a part of a consolidator, a group that was, had a network of hospitals, and being the people on one side doing the things that affect the people on the boots on the ground. And then now stepping into this kind of relief world where I'm working both for corporates and small businesses, and it's fascinating to watch. And then to see on the other side, like one of the groups I was with, they just had like a town hall going on, and one of the assistants was watching it, and I was just in the background doing something unimportant, like shopping for a ceiling fan or something, while we were waiting on patients to come in.
Yeah.
But it was fascinating having been, even at the bank, I kind of at one point had shifted a little more internal, helping run town halls, and this just vast difference of being on the frontline employees versus the corporate side, and that just the nature of work is so different, that whether it's just the structure of your day, the type of work you're doing, it's just a different world, and how easy it is, even the most connected, in touch people, because when you're on the corporate side and not on the floor, how easy it could be to get out of touch just from the structure of your day, and how meetings are run, and how you're planning your day and how you're structuring your day, versus when you're on the clinic floor, and the experience of that, that I think has been a fascinating thing. And that the more and more that the bigger groups can keep that pulse of being what it's like to be in the clinic, physically in the clinic, and the
Do
how
you
it is when
know?
you're in the back versus
Do you
in
have
the
like an
front.
idea as to how? Like any ideas as to how like they can maintain that?
Like, literally go work in one of your clinics. If you're a corporate employee, you should have to spend X number of hours in your clinic every year. Of
Right.
even just the other day, it was a small, but it wasn't even a corporate clinic, but you come in the back door, and that at the end of the day, I was like, I don't even think I actually saw or talked to the receptionist today. Like the front of the house
Right.
versus the back of the house, not intentionally, just kind of the flow of the day. Nothing brought me up there for
Yeah.
no other reason. And the how does communication happen in environments like that? How do you create a strong culture? um and especially in the corporate side, I think one of the biggest things that, having been, so my role at Live Oak was obviously very educational outreach focused for several years, and then there was a shift in the rules of SBA lending. And so the kind of position and the types of loans that we were doing relative to veterinarians and the corporate consolidation just didn't make sense strategically to kind of keep that going. And so I had shifted to an internal role. And so I was looking more at internal stuff at the bank, because I just wasn't ready to leave yet. And so I'd worked on, I ended up, this is how weird my career is. So I was a vet working at a bank, which was weird. And then
Yeah.
because I had been doing education and teaching, folks like you for a long time, how a bank actually works and why it works the
Mm.
way it does, and then how do you, as a practitioner, leverage that. I ended up actually taking over or working on internal training at the bank, because it turns out when
Right.
you have developers and all these other people coming in to work at the bank, they also need to learn how the bank works. And so I kind of already had a lot of material baked in, and of how to
Right.
teach those concepts, and what is SBA lending and why that works, and all these things, and the basics of, at one point I'd been building an online learning thing for veterinary business. And anyway, so I was just very in touch with like educational principles and stuff. So anyway, I ended up internal training at a bank for the HR team. Which, by the way,
I
10
mean,
out of 10 recommend
makes
anybody should ever work in HR. Like, I feel like any group, like at any point in your career, you need to at least do a stint in HR to see, like, oh my God, you're like, oh, now I understand why all those rules are in place. You get the behind the scenes version, and you're like, when something comes out of policy, you're like, yes, we need that because that's going to protect us.
I don't understand
Rather
why
than
we
a
got a
new
memo. Stop licking the drinking fountains. Like, well, because
Yeah.
Bob won't stop licking the drinking fountains.
So that was interesting. And where was I going? What were we talking about? Oh, corporate employees working, and remembering what it's like to be on the
Oh yeah,
floor,
pulling way back.
and
Yes.
just the 20 to 30 minute appointments, and just I don't know, it's been what it feels like to work a day in a clinic and just how, I don't want to say physically, but it just mentally is so different than when you're in kind of corporate email life,
Right.
and you're always thinking about the future and planning and strategic versus like when you're in the clinic, you're very like, what is in front of you right then, and it's a very you're very present to the action that is occurring, and those are
Right.
very different kind of mindsets and worlds, and I don't know, it's just fascinating.
I mean, it's a like a common critique is that like the people at the top are not veterinarians and therefore they could not understand what is ever happening like on that level, which I don't know. I mean, it seems like kind of based on what you're saying is that no matter what, there's going to be a separation. It doesn't matter, like the 4 years of vet school per se, like you learned about the pathophysiology, or even having, worked at one point in time in a hospital. If you are in this entire other world, like there is a separation. And so it's about maintaining that connection. It's
Yes,
not about
yes.
like
That
pedigree.
whether you're a veterinarian or not, remembering, kind of stepping back into that life of just what does it feel like to be at the end of the day of having seen that many patients, and that kind of, I think about the trust and the relationship that's built. When you go into a in corporate world, a 20-minute meeting is, very short. Usually they're 30 minutes, an hour long kind of like interactions that you're having. And then you're asking people to go in and have an interaction with a client they've never met, whose family member you're taking care of, to build that trust all within a 15-minute appointment, and do that on repeat day after day after day. And how many just
Right.
faces and people you meet and have to build trust with, and just the wear and tear that has on you as a human, and your ability to continue to care and engage and show up as your best self for every client every time, when you've done it so many times a single day,
Yeah.
15 to 30 people a day that you're doing that with. It's just a different experience than, call it a corporate meeting where you're engaging with people you already know on a subject you've probably talked about a couple times,
Right.
in an engagement, and you're living by your Outlook calendar, and Zoom meetings, and versus actually physically having to show up to an office or show up to
Sure.
work,
Yeah.
and then being engaged very much in the present and what is presented in front of you, and not at these high level things. So I think whether you're a veterinarian or not, just being able to re-engage with a clinic, on a regular basis, is a very important aspect of if we want to keep that connection. I know where I was going earlier. We were talking about training. I finally it came back. Oh, a thing that has happened, because okay, this is where the bank training thing. I was involved with some like leadership and management training. I think the thing that has happened in veterinary medicine that we are ill prepared for is that we now have middle managers,
Mm,
whether we like it or not. People at the clinic who may have been the top prior to, joining a network of hospitals, however big or small. Now they're reporting to somebody, and you have now effectively become a middle manager, which no one has been
right.
trained or prepared for. And that unto itself,
Right.
of managing up and managing down, is a skill set unto itself. And so the more and more that we can prepare people for management, is a skill. And it is, I mean, even in the business world where they're thinking about this way more than we are, it is a hard skill to learn. It is a hard thing to do. And when you look at the research and look at the data, the number one reason people leave their jobs is because of their manager, not because
Mm,
of the business they're working for, not because of corporate values or whatever. It is the direct experience of the manager. And when we look at veterinary medicine and all the training we have, as high level as
yeah.
it is, it doesn't necessarily cover the skills related to management and
Oh,
being a
not at all. Yeah.
supervisor and who you're reporting to. And when you look, I mean, and you see the Facebook groups and you see the things that people are leaving, a lot of it has to do with their direct supervisor. And so the more that we can prepare those direct supervisors, um, to be good leaders and be good managers, I think the better we'll be. And I think we started to see that with the burnout during COVID, is like finally people had to be like, whoa, I got to take care of my people. I'm not going to have any. And
Yeah.
so I feel like
Yeah.
that has started to be a little bit more of a conversation relative to that, and the corporate groups and the groups behind the corporate groups, the private equity groups, obviously know this from all the other businesses that they've run and been a part of. They start to have those conversations like, how are you teaching your management and leadership training? So I think there's some good things that can happen there. Obviously, it's all trade-offs ultimately, and I think that the piece that we have to consider is, salaries dramatically went up now that corporate consolidation has started to happen, which, at 5-7 years, the conversation that was everywhere was student debt, student debt. And it was fascinating to me because at the bank, I ran the vet student program and I ran a pharmacy student program. And they came out with the same level of debt, but their starting salaries were, 30 to 40 grand higher. And so it was a piece of the conversation, and there was some level of anxiety, but it was not near the predominant, which was that debt to income ratio. And obviously there's been a lot of the student debt been put on hold and stuff like that, but the salaries have also gone up. And so that debt to income ratio changing is now not dominating the conversation. So I think, like anything, it's a pendulum. It's got to swing, and it'll find its balance, and people will find where they belong. I think that's a big piece of it, is people finding where do you fit relative to, do you fit better in a small business? Do you fit better in the structure and the hierarchy of a bigger corporate group? And they have pros and cons. And so it's finding what balance works for you, and finding the lifestyle that you want to live as a veterinarian, and how to create that. And I think that's what you've done beautifully, and many other of your colleagues have led the way, I would say, in starting to think about that, and the kind of, call it the lifestyle design of veterinary medicine, because I think it was 10 years ago, it was a little more cookie cutter than it is now. And even kind of now coming back to clinical practice, it's fascinating, because I'm like, when I was coming out of vet school, these weren't options. Wellness only care was not an option for a full career path. Like, it was GP or bust. And I will say this, coming back to practice, having been in kind of HR corporate world, looking at, call it the job duties of a GP veterinarian, holy cow, the amount of information to do the job of a GP veterinarian is just vast. It is a massive amount of information that you're supposed to be able to recall at the drop of a hat and answer questions to. When you look at like any other job out there in the world, and like what they have to know to do their job well, and then you look at like the body of knowledge that just to be an average GP doctor, to go from seeing puppy and kitten visits to doing a dental to spaying a dog to treating a sick cat for something, like that is a large body of knowledge to be able to navigate, and I don't think we give ourselves enough credit in how big just being a GP doctor is. Like, that's a lot. I think we underestimate how broad of a spectrum that information is, and relative to, again, when you look at all the jobs out there in the world, like there's not a lot. It's gonna be hard pressed to find something that you have to navigate more information than an average day as a GP veterinarian, which we just do it because that's how it's always been. But it was fascinating to watch, a soft tissue surgery with an anesthetic event, and it's like you have to navigate all that on, a specific species and what to do, and then turn around and then go see a gecko and then a dog with kidney failure. Like, what? Holy cow, that's a lot of things going on in an average day. And so I think the thing I've appreciated now is that we are starting to, and not specialize in the specialty medicine, but just have these kind of niche markets of veterinarians, of like, okay, great, you want to do just wellness only? Like, there is a place to do that only.
Right.
If you want to do dental only, you can do that. If you want to do surgery,
Yeah.
you can do that. And so not just specialty care, but as a doctor, saying, here's the things I like to do as a doctor, and finding kind of your ability to mostly do that on a day-to-day
Mm-hmm.
basis. You can't be just pigeonhole yourself all the time, but that to me is a cool part of how this industry has evolved in the last, call it, 10 years. Because it's like I don't know, I'm taking this weird like pause away from it to come back to it, but with this whole new business and corporate perspective.
Yeah, it's like being cryogenically frozen.
It really is. But then I walk into a clinic and I'm like, so basically I'm a new grad.
Right.
I'm like, the client's like, how long have you been out? I'm like, really doesn't matter.
It's irrelevant. Please don't ask.
It's irrelevant to my experience level. And before that, oh, by the way, I was a horse vet.
Right.
So, this is the first time I've really been working on small animal medicine. Like I was doing something the other day, and the doctor was kind of like, "Hey, can you like do this?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, I've done it on a horse." Sure.
But that was a while ago also.
While ago also, but anatomy is,
I mean,
roughly the same, just smaller.
it's true. Yeah. I mean, honestly, even I, as a small animal practitioner, I'll be like, I'll reach back to things that I did in equine medicine, like in clinics. And I'm like, well, I mean, we did it then. I don't see why it wouldn't work now. It's like, it's just a good idea is what it is. So I also do wonder if like because there is this idea that information itself grows, right? Like we're
Oh yeah.
learning new things
Oh,
all the
for sure.
time, and that growth is not like linear. It ends up being exponential. So, at the idea that a general practitioner is going to be able to, retain all of that as it grows even further is also kind of crazy. So at some point that specialization in a way like kind of has to be what happens, because there's only, as we know more and more things about the eye, there's only so much that you're going to be able to know about that. So it's just like, well, this guy just focuses on eyes, he loves eyes, so we're just going to send it to that guy.
Well, and I think,
Yeah.
if you're a veterinarian out there and like you're like, man, that was a tough day. Like, yeah, you have a hard job. That's impressive. I mean, you should be really proud of yourself just being a GP veterinarian. I feel like in vet school they very much undercredited how much they actually know and do, and
Right.
in the scheme of the world, like that's a huge job.
It is true. I mean, it is a hard job. It's one of those things where I mean, like, I find that actually what ends up being difficult in ER is how routine it can get. I'm sure that that's true with anything. Like most of the things are going to end up being about the same. But there's runs of ER shifts where it's just like vomiting and diarrhea, and it's just like, all right, here's the same diagnostic plan, here's the same treatment plan, here's the same escalation plan. It's just like I'm going insane. Um, Whereas, yeah, I mean, with a lot of GP, even the couple shifts that I worked, I'm like, yeah, there is like the portion where it's just, wellness visit. But I feel like a lot of times you like sprinkle it in with all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have a friend who constantly is talking to her criticalist friend about like cases. She knows more about some of those things than I do. Like, how? Like, you're in my world. What do you do?
Yeah, and I think that's the cool part too, is like is being able to collaborate, and that like we almost have to, because it's too
Right.
big to not to there's just so much that goes into the emotional side of it, and the trauma that just sometimes you just can't win against biology, unfortunately, and whatever is
Sure.
going on in that animal. And I think one of the things I've come to appreciate is just again, I love the cryogenically frozen. Coming back to practice of,
Right.
just sometimes how a case or a client or anything can be a traumatic experience, and that we need to be better um, about processing that trauma. And that, I go back and think, 10 years ago, sitting in the car crying, and it's like, you should have gone to a therapist at that point. That's
Right.
where that outlet for that now, kind of everything has swung. Like that's what those people are there for, is for you to dump all your junk on them,
Yeah.
and to help sort it. and to process it and get it out of your body and into the world. And there's professionals out there to help you do that. And that unto itself is just, there is trauma associated with us being in the position we are, and being able to process that appropriately, I think is an important aspect of our job as, healthcare providers. Um, when you're encountering those things, and that to show up for the next patient, the next week, all of that you need to process that, and process that likely with a professional, or a colleague too, but that you are not weak, you are not, it's not that you're not a good doctor, like it's just you're a human, and you've encountered something that was very tough, and it was, whether your skills were stretched or your knowledge was stretched or your emotions were stretched, being able to process that with another human, I think is a really important aspect that coming back, I'm like, oh shit, we should have done way more of that on a day-to-day basis than we did. And so just having an appreciation for that when, those events occur, and depending on kind of what aspect of practice you are in, how often and how much that may need to occur might be different. But that to me was coming back to it. And again, time capsule. It's like, man, we should have been processing a lot more, I think.
I mean, a couple of thoughts there. I mean, one is I just talked to somebody yesterday TJ, who he was saying that a lot of us sort of manage our burnout. So it's just like a bunch of doctors who are just like managing it. It's like we're still burning out, we're still like highly affected by it, but we're just, trying to find ways to like manage it. And that's not necessarily, I think that's the word that he used, but it's not necessarily that we're like, working through it or processing it or, finding healthy ways to interact with it. It's just like, no, we're burning out. We're just sort of like figuring out how to do like a controlled burn. And, and then the other thought is, when you look at the top professions that, it's like the number one professions that have suicide, or, where like the percentage of individuals who commit suicide or whatever that is, it's primarily health professions. It's not like, veterinarians and then, accountants or something. It's like, it's doctors, like medical doctors, veterinarians, dentists, and then like financial advisors or something like that is in there. But I wonder what that link is between like all the health professions. So it's not unique to veterinary medicine. Like, what is all of that? I wonder if it's like kind of what you're talking about. It's like we all, for whatever reasons, like we run into some, gosh, I mean, this is all speculation at this point, but when it comes to the things that you're talking about, where you like run into the end of your ability, or where you're like constantly questioning your own knowledge, or you have outcomes that are poor, and like you potentially blame yourself. And then also I do wonder if there is some level of, like, for me, I still think that there's something to do with like this thing where it's like there was this profession that it's almost like on a pedestal, and you like wanted it to be a certain thing that ended up like falling short of that. I'm sure that that's somehow related, but I don't know. It's just curious. Maybe I'm just posing a rhetorical question. Like how, like, why are those the professions? Like, what is linking us?
I don't know. Again, in my cryogenic state, coming back to practice after 10 years, one of the things I have noticed, I'll say, and I'm a little biased, and I've been doing a lot of like high volume stuff, so there's that element to it, and starting to kind of get more in a regular GP setting a little bit more. The brief interaction, not brief, I mean, it is brief in the scheme of the world, and the volume of interactions that you have with clients, it's hard to turn that full care, or you caring the whole time and being present and building like that level of like wanting to be this just amazing engaged doctor that many times in a row in a day. with
Right.
different people you've never met, you have no background, no, or sometimes you do, but it was probably brief. Sometimes I walk into a room with a dog I've seen before, and I'm like, was this the same human that was with it last time? I don't know. Recognize the dog.
Yeah.
Not sure I recognize the
Right.
human.
Right.
um, could have been a different person.
Mm.
And you just have that like ability, that rinse and repeat thing
Yeah.
happening to me. Um, and so where are you finding that engagement and that like caring, and I think it has to be from your team too, but that also can be a very different thing all the time too, of different shifts and different people coming in. And so how are you building, strong, rich relationships in
Right.
15-minute increments? Obviously there's long-term patients that you're seeing and managing, and those become those clients, but finding those red threads, of what are you there for, what are you caring about, but that piece to me, I call it it was in Fight Club, the single serving friend when he sits on a plane. And I always laugh about that because I used to travel all the time. But you have your single serving
Right.
friends, and
Yeah.
sometimes I feel like the client interaction can also feel like that sometimes.
Yeah.
And so how are you building a rich, meaningful connection, with the people you're supposed to be? As a veterinarian, that's who you're supposed to be, and that's kind of the idea you
Right.
have, and that's what you remember the veterinarian being. But then when you're the one doing it over and over and over and over and over, and over again, it loses that richness that it may have had from the experience that you've had. And I remember even
Yeah.
talking about this in the externship when we were doing like business models and service models and all of that, and how small of a piece in the experience of going to the vet as a pet owner, of how little the veterinarian in that whole kind of, from like, I got to make the appointment, I got to talk to somebody on the phone, I got to show up, I got to
Right.
spend time, of like the minutes that you're actually interacting with quote unquote the veterinarian, is a very small piece of a much bigger experience. And when you're the veterinarian, that small piece on repeat, I think, is something that contributes to the burnout. I
Mm.
don't know how or why or what pieces of it, but I can
Well,
feel that thing being like, this isn't as gratifying as it was on the other end when you're the
yeah.
one receiving the veterinary services versus, you know, providing it.
Yeah. I mean, it seems related to me to this thing. So when I went to in 2018, after I finished my first year of like emergency, I needed like it was a rough year for me in
Yeah,
general.
I can
So I
say
needed to like go out
that
and
was the Mercedes
just need
year, right?
that was
That's what you
yeah, it was a BMW. Yeah, I was definitely
oh,
the
that's it.
fellow with
That
the
was it. It was a nice car.
so- yes, it was.
But it was a like head scratcher. I was like, yeah, I feel like you're going through some shit. I
I
need to buy
definitely
this car.
was.
It was a nice car though.
You're right. It was fantastic. I do miss it for a lot of reasons, but like as I get older, I don't know if I can get another one. I'm like I already went through it. I just need something more sensible like a Volvo or
Damn, it was a nice car.
but yeah, it was a nice car. But yeah, so I like went to Europe for a couple of weeks and just sort
Oh
of,
yeah.
traveled around. And some of that time I spent with friends who lived out there. And then a lot of that time I end up spending alone. And I am the person in general who's like okay with just walking around cities and exploring. And that's just my thing. So I ostensibly have no problem with like staying in hostels and then just like leaving and walking and then coming back. But I will say that 3 weeks of that, um, it was a little bit rough because you never, as it turns out, I'm never more lonely than when I'm surrounded by a lot of people that I am not at all connected to.
Mhm.
And it seems like that could be related, right? Like
Yeah.
you're going and you're having all of these interactions that are meaningful esque, but it's like you could insert like, yeah, there's certain things that I can do to be like individual, whatever. But it's like truly a lot of that ends up being like I'm the doctor in this scenario. Anyone can do the thing that I'm doing. It's like anyone can recommend blood work and radiographs. Like, I don't need to be here, that type of thing. The other person, especially because my last name's Ashudo, like no one really understands it. Like, I'm just in this weird anonymous world over and over and over again. And at some point, you're just like, I need to be connected to someone
Mhm.
somewhere.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it feels super lonely, even though you're like busy all the time and surrounded by people constantly. I could definitely imagine that that's related. Hmm. Yeah, maybe. And I don't know what the solution there is too, because that is a part of the job. Maybe it is just understanding the purpose of that part and then like gaining your meaningful connection to your
Yeah.
team.
Yeah, and I think that
Hmm.
it's somewhere in there of like acknowledging that something is happening and that you might not be deriving joy from the thing that you thought you would be, because that eventually, and this is part of the reason I'm not doing horse medicine too, is because horses are my stress relief, and
Hmm.
inevitably if they're my day-to-day work, like they then become my stressor too.
Yeah.
And so I need them to be the stress relief for me. And so I think that there's something in that, like when you do something, and you hear this a lot of like if your passion becomes your job, at some point it is a job. And
Right.
so, finding that balance and then finding those red threads, and even right now, like from the business aspect of what I'm finding myself in doing like relief is like a big thing for me is just being helpful. And that
Right.
I enjoy in life
Yeah.
just being helpful to people and being a relief that is being helpful to the business. And as
Yeah.
much as, there's some satisfaction of helping the clients, it's more about like I derive satisfaction from helping the business, and helping those practitioners not have to be in the practice that day for whatever reasons they need to restore themselves. Is like, cool, I
Hmm.
can babysit all the wellness appointments that come in today, so you can go have a day to either learn a new skill or do something outside the practice. Like that, I'm
Yeah.
very finding that part weirdly fulfilling, but that when I look at my
Sure.
life is very in line with who I am. Of just I
Right.
enjoy
Yeah,
being.
that's not surprising to me at all because that's like the same thing that I feel like I get satisfaction
Yeah.
from. Like, oh yeah, of course, Jess would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's fine. And just like scripting your career in a way that like um to all the other veterinarians out there that might not have found that yet. Like what are the things
Right.
that like make you happy as a person? And then
And
shaping the practice part to fit.
yeah, and to think too that like, or I guess to understand that there's still an activation energy to joy. Like if you remember all those like kinetic versus thermal or thermodynamic reactions in chemistry where you'd have like the graph and then there'd be like this little hump and then you have to like go over the hump in order to like reach this thermodynamic product which is like way lower in energy. It's like, yeah, you want to be here at this like bottom level. You want to cross over this little mountain, but like there's still the mountain. Even if it's like a reaction that's going to run really quickly and it wants to happen, like you still have to go over something. So the reason that I'm saying that is that like you still have to put some amount of effort in. It's not like things that are joyous to you or things that are restorative to you or are in alignment with your values or whatever will just come naturally. You don't have to like work on it. The fact is that like sometimes I want to play guitar, but like the sheer idea of having to like go downstairs, plug in the amp, get the guitar out of the closet, like, do all of that. It's like, I can't do any of this. It's like, I don't want to put on shoes right now and go outside. Are you kidding me? you know, but it's like, I think understanding that it doesn't necessarily have to come easy for it to be that thing that is like beneficial for you to do or engage in.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. And you don't have to be good at it either.
And you don't have to be good at it. You're right.
You don't have
Absolutely.
to be
Like
the
the other
best. You
day,
don't have to achieve. You can, like as long as you're doing it at a level that is pushing your skills in a way that kind of gets you to that state, like that's perfectly fine to be an amateur, whatever you're doing.
right.
And you don't have to go, even if you're competing. So I grew up Western riding horses and doing stuff. Barrel racing and roping, and so it was very tangible, very like did you catch the cow, did you beat your last time, that sort
Right.
of thing. So it was very
Right.
individually competitive, and same thing. I found myself in the English world. I did transition over to English, and dressage, same thing of like being able to go in and beat my scores, specifically of like there's the hunter world where you're judged, but like you come in first or last, you don't know why, but versus dressage, they give you a score sheet and you tangibly can see on the things that you've improved on, or gotten better at. In dressage, I have a measurable, output of that, of like, cool, we came in last place, but it was still 3 points higher than we've ever gotten before. That was still a good
Right.
day. And so there's some level of that, but I don't care if I came in last place because I did better, and we did better as a team. And we've improved upon the things that we've been practicing and all of those things. So, there's joy in that. I think that was also a fascinating thing to me, getting back into riding and showing, just schooling shows, nothing crazy, but that all throughout like high school and stuff, I mean, a lot of people are engaged in sports and engaged in competitive pursuits, and how easily that disappears as an adult. And that
Yeah.
competition and performance, and like how that thing, again, it drives you to perform and to improve. And so when you have those moments of like, I don't want to go get the thing out of the closet or put the shoes on or do the hard
Right.
work to get better. For me, I'm a pretty externally motivated person. So I sign
Yeah.
up for
Yeah.
shows because then it makes me go, it's like backtracks into like, oh, it's hot. Do you want to ride? And it's like, well, you kind of, if you want to go to that show, you got to go do the
Yeah.
work. And so there is that
Yeah.
driving force to get me outside,
Yeah.
do the hard work. And so finding those things for yourself of like, what is that thing that makes me show up and do the work? I know, even just like, going to check on the horses and throw them some hay at night. Like a lot of times I'm like, I don't want to. And it's cold, it's dark, it's whatever. And then I get out there, I look
Yeah.
up, and it's just the most amazing night full of stars and owls, and just like something that is just like, wow, I almost missed this. But it took that like external motivation to get me out the door and off the couch.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, it's like, this is, I don't know, just moments like that where you're like, oh yeah, this is awesome, and this is incredible, and like, puts life in perspective, and is beauty, and is awe, and is wonder, and all of those things that, again, it's those small mental moments of like that help create that kind of mental hygiene to make you, available and present to do the things you need to do during the day.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. I wonder if I mean, that's why I like just put some podcast episodes up, because then it forces me to continue doing it, to be honest.
Yeah,
And then like that then like forces me to decide or figure out like how to make it better, and then like what am I doing with it and those things.
yeah.
So like
Which
that
is the thing that we're talking about. We're doing it right
right.
now for you.
Yeah, exactly.
You're
Exactly.
performing and you're talking, you're
But
connecting.
it does, like, when I wrote that album, so the most recent album that I wrote was like the songs for the friends back in North Carolina, right? Like, and I knew that I needed to write that album, which meant that I needed to have, 9 songs or whatever at this specific time, because this is the only time that we're going to be able to like all get together and for me to present it. So then I went from, the creativity desert basically to all of a sudden over the course of 2 months or whatever, like writing all of these songs and trying to like figure out, like what the lyrics are, and like what style of song is this going to be, this person. So then I'm like, now because of that deadline, like doing all of this stuff, which ultimately fulfills me. And then
Yeah.
and then I go into this other state where I'm just like, oh yeah, I'll write a song eventually. you know? So yeah, I
I'm
mean,
that way
what
with
is the
art around the holidays, and I'm like, oh, what can I get this person? And then at some point, I'm like, oh, a portrait or something of their animal, like, and then I'm like, oh, this person too, and then I go into like hardcore art mode, like all my creative energy for like the holidays, because it also stems
right.
from when I was a kid. I did a 4-H, like this one time in 4-H, they had a Christmas card thing where you would like draw Christmas cards and they would give them to like the nursing homes and stuff. Anyway, then my mom made photocopies of it and mailed it to a bunch of our friends, and that was our Christmas card for the year. Well, that began a tradition.
Nice. Yeah.
And so every year I had to draw our Christmas card. Which is first, it wasn't a big deal because it was a small list of people that got it. But then, like, word got out, and, like, then this list got, like, to almost over 100 people on this list over time of, like, people.
Oh.
So it became this massive, like, assembly line art construction project, putting together these, like, hand done cards, hand drawn
Yeah.
cards, and then we would make them or whatever. And it was a great Christmas tradition, and, like, we still laugh about it. But it definitely, it kind of same thing of, like, you have that deadline of, like, oh shit, I think it's done for the holidays.
Yeah.
And so again, like, kind of how do we, like, as people, like, know that about ourselves and, like, intentionally kind of put those things into our path so that we do, because we do sometimes need that, like, push to get outside. And for some people it's like running like 5Ks or marathons or
Right.
whatever,
Yes.
kind of push them to
Yeah.
do that. And so, you know, whether it's athletic or not, or just externally kind of finding that thing, that drives you and pushes you to perform and consistently get
Yeah.
involved with, whether it's a relatedness or a skill. But, like, I think we as humans are very designed to do those things and connect in those
And
ways.
one of the things that I'm, like, questioning constantly at this point is, like, what I'm doing career-wise, and, you know, like, how what do I do from here to, like, gain more information? Because to gain more information for, like, the sake of gaining more information is just this very vague, open goal that ends up being not very motivating. And then, you know, what I feel like is I feel like I then fall short of that, like, mastery piece that you were talking about, right? So then I'm just like a guy who knows a couple of things, or at least that's how I feel, right? Like, I'm a dude who, like, knows some stuff. I practice okay medicine, like, nothing bad happens, like, I have okay outcomes, right? Like, but that's not very satisfying. So I don't know, like, how do I transform that? Because, like, within my own career at this point, I don't, well, within the practicing side, I just don't have anything like that anymore. And so then I feel very stuck. And I could also imagine that there's many people who are practitioners who feel like they're in the same place, like, without really identifying what's next. So I don't know what to do about that. Help.
And I think that's where you start to observe, right? Like, you're at this kind of stagnant point of, like, I don't know. And, like, find, you know, over the course of a week or whatever in your world equates to a week as several shifts in a row. If it was a normal person's Monday through Friday, what would that be to you?
Right.
And
Yeah.
just, like,
Tuesday and Wednesday. That's it.
observe your mental state during shifts of, like, what are the things that when you have to do them, you're like, I don't wanna. And what are the things that you kind of find your safe self in those meditative, that flow state of, like, oh, okay, there's kind of this thing there. And observe yourself and just be a scientist on yourself, and you are your own subject.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
find the elements of medicine that you do find yourself kind of losing track of time doing. And just for whatever your next string of shifts, like, I don't know, keep a little notebook with you and just write down when you're feeling really like, whoa, that was cool. And when you're like, God, that sucked. Like, I don't want to do that drudgery thing, because those become your strengths are the things that give you strength, and your weaknesses are the things that drain you. I think a lot of, and that was Marcus Buckingham's work kind of pointing that out of, you know, it's not necessarily what you're good or bad at is your strength or your weakness, because if it's something that gives you joy even though you suck at it, it doesn't mean it's a weakness, right? It gives you strength to do that thing. And so finding that in
That's
your
really
own
interesting.
world, yeah, of, like, what gives you strength, versus what drains you, and just observe those for a period of time, and be a scientist again. Your own, you are
Yeah.
your own subject, and say, what is it that I find myself gravitating towards, and what do I find myself, you know, shying away from, and then follow the things that you gravitate towards and dig a little deeper, And how do you add more of that? How do you get better at that? How do you enhance that thing that you are deriving
Is that
fulfillment
the
from?
red threads thing that you're talking
Red threads,
about? Is that
yeah,
where yeah.
those
So
are the
it's like
red
those
threads.
are the pieces that you like connect to or connect you to, like the things that give you strength or like your values or whatever.
Yeah,
Okay. And you said if like 20% of what you're interacting with are associated with those like red threads, then you're what, more likely to find satisfaction in what you're doing or what?
yeah,
Huh. Yeah, I feel like that's I mean that feels right. Cuz at any point when surely in any profession or anything that you do on a consistent basis, you're going to run into this sort of a blockade, a stagnancy, a plateau or whatever. And it's about sort of figuring out like, okay, well now what? And you can either continue doing it in exactly the way that you've been doing it ad nauseum, which isn't necessarily, in my opinion, like a recipe for success and happiness. Because at some point you're just you're not going to gain a lot of satisfaction from that, or you have to figure out like, well, what do I have to change in order to either keep doing this job or change into something else or
yeah,
whatever. Yeah, because even in general practice, presumably, like general practice is like the closest thing to like the 9 to 5 model or wellness, I suppose, or whatever. So like even in this thing where it's like I'm going to do basically this thing from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, forever, until I retire. Like there's got to be those things. It's not actually going to be the same thing every day. It's like when you reach your point of stagnancy, like what do you change? Like what do you dive back into? Find out your red threads and like adjust from there,
yeah.
presumably.
And then I think also to think about the to then go jump from over to like the Simon Sinek world of the infinite versus finite games. And I think for so long, we were as vet students, like very much in finite world. Like we got to do all this
Right.
stuff in undergrad because that's going to get us into vet school. In vet school, we got to do all this stuff so we can graduate and become a vet and keep our license.
Right.
And then we lose that thing.
Yeah.
Like we've been playing finite games for
Yeah.
years and years and
Here's
years.
the information for these 9 lectures. Learn it. Take the test. That is it.
Yeah. Did I do
Now
it?
move
Yes.
on.
Check, check, check. And now
Right.
we're in a career that is an infinite game of like, what am I deriving joy from? And so balancing that and recognizing what are the things that you do derive that satisfaction from, and how are you quote unquote winning? Are you ahead or are you behind in the kind of infinite games? And so really encourage people to kind of read that book and or listen to one of his talks of just like finite games versus infinite games, and really start to structure your life around the infinite games, and how do you continue to um, win at your own life, basically.
Mm. Yeah.
One of the things of like most people when they think about like what are they wanting to do is like love the work you're doing, love the people that you care about, and being loved in return. And like, okay, how are you structuring your life to go do those things, and to be available to do those things, and that if you're so drained from your work every day that you can't love and be loved by the people you care about, how is that serving you as a person and a human, and what things would allow you to do that. So that one for me, and again in that kind of reflective period at the beginning and end of the year, is like I write those things down again, of learning and using my gifts and my skills to make the world a better place and improve the lived experience for other people. And those will change year to year of what I'm doing in those things, and how I'm
Yeah.
actually achieving it. But it's knowing that those are the things that, like, as a human, I want to continue to do throughout kind of the course of my life. And there's a few of them that change, but how I activate on those things changes. But those things are core to who I am, and what makes me, fulfilled. And if I'm not doing those things, then I'm probably not going to be a really happy person.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
And so it is that shift, I think, in your career to what is it about medicine, or what is it about being a veterinarian those kind of long-standing things. And I know the one I kind of keep. I've only been in practice a very short amount of time, or back in clinical practice, but communication is a huge piece of what I find myself really focusing on improving. And how do I show up and how do I engage with the people around me better and better? Because I know it doesn't matter what case comes through the door. It doesn't matter, because that's the hard part. Is like, cool, you want to be great at eyes. Well, if an eye case doesn't come in that day, you don't get to play your red thread.
Right.
And so finding, like, how can you find something that is consistently, if you're like somebody that loves efficiency, like how do you get better at doing something within your practice management software more efficiently, or creating a template, or doing something in that regards, if you're very like type A organized, or finding the things that are going to be present, because you can't always rely on the cases coming through the door to provide that fulfillment. They might not come through the door. And so how do you improve that, and control the things you can control, which is obviously I have to talk to people all day long. So it may even be the team members, of just how am I being more present with the team members around me? How am I helping them be better humans too? How am I helping influence the culture of this practice? How am I showing up for the pet owners? And even as simple as making more eye contact throughout the day, to give them that experience that I care. Because you probably experienced this, because we've been at conferences together. I am like really bad at introducing both myself and the people around me. Like, I just kind of jump in to a conversation, and I'm like, was anybody? Wait, did we cover the like basics of like names? Nope. Okay, great. For me,
exactly.
on a regular basis, is like, introduce yourself when you walk into a room. That is my communication goal for the day. Hi, I'm Dr. Jess.
Oh, you go with Dr. Jess.
Have you seen my name on paper?
I mean, yeah. Have you seen mine?
Yeah, if you sound yours out, you get there. Mine does not. You don't get the shell sound. The people want to make a like hard C out of it.
They do. Yeah,
not the shell part. So I
including my Siri calling Jess Trichel. Okay. Although I think it's Trickle is what they. I can't. I don't know. Mine's Scottish,
I get Trickle,
so I don't.
So yeah, I go with Dr. Jess.
Okay.
Just because I don't want to make people feel, like there's always, and even like the receptionist or the tech, if I'm in a clinic setting where I'm going to be there for a longer period of time, I might be, like when I was in internship, I did go by Dr. Trichel, but they all knew it, but especially when you're coming in and out of practices, it's like, Jess is easier. And so not making people be like, oh, is this, feel insecure about saying your name. That's the worst, when you're like, how do you say it? It's not like it looks.
Yeah, that is fair.
But that's
I try to diffuse that with a Shudo, but like I can't with Dr. Matt. Like Dr. Matt.
Yeah, you're not a Dr. Matt. I can see that. Yeah.
No, I don't think I am. I think that it's like Dr. Matt doesn't recommend coags every 12 hours or something. Anyway, Dr. Matt has a treatment for you, and you're going to go out the door. Well, hey, I'm Dr. Matt.
Yeah, I can do that. Okay.
Oh, but what I was going to say is, yes, we will talk forever. But I did, and at some point we have to stop. But I was just curious, and I feel like I want to follow up on this. I wrote down a lot of things to follow up on that we're not going to follow up on. But one of them was when you were talking about Live Oak, you had mentioned that the other industries that Live Oak sort of, provided financial services for, or whatever, had gone through consolidation events before. And as it turns out, like, this is something that happens. And we were just sort of like following the script effectively. And that's an interesting thing to me, because it's like, one of the whole conceits of this podcast in a way is like, I think that there's a link between what our experience is and the experience of other people. We just think that somehow we're like special. No, that like we're unique and alone in it, but I don't necessarily think that that's true. So I suppose my question is like, do you have any insight into like, the feelings of the people, and you may not, but like the feelings of the people who were involved in those consolidation type events. So like I'm not sure what industries, but like let's say breweries or something, right? Like, is it that the people on the ground like feel that same sort of disconnect between like the higher level management things, and like are there any lessons there that like we can see or learn from?
Yeah, so absolutely the experience is um, I wouldn't say exactly the same. I don't know the boots on the ground experience, but the kind of trajectory of what tends to happen in these instances is over, at some point, certified rich people realize that an industry has, called private equity, these groups with institutional investors kind of realize that veterinary or any profession is a business worth investing in, and that typically if you buy a bunch of those businesses and roll them up, that there will be a bigger fish that would want to buy them, and you go buy a bunch of these businesses and sell them to a bigger fish who then goes buys more and buys different groups, and so this kind of hungry hippo thing happening of buy
Mm-hmm.
up as many as you can, get them running, or kind of keep them cruising, and then sell them to somebody else who wants a bigger number of practices. um, and so that's kind of happening, or businesses, whatever it was. And then at some point, the efficiency and the amount that people are willing to pay goes up and up and up. But at some point, it hits a threshold, right? And a lot of times it tends to be at, kind of that 7 to 8 year mark. There tends to be a little bit of a bubble, and that bubble starts to burst a little bit. And the heavy consolidation really started around 2015, and then last year we started to see the sales of these groups of practices maybe not happen as easily as they had been, and so some of them
Mm.
were not happening, even though they thought there would be, and so it kind of tends, then everybody kind of starts to tighten up. Well, then when you're tightening up, regardless of what was happening in the economy, of the just labor and inflation that has been happening, this is just kind of the typical cycle. They start to try and gain efficiencies to look more profitable so that other people will want to buy them. Well, what happens when you're trying to do that? You're squeezing the belt. You're trying to, lower costs, whether that's people, whether that's inventory, being more efficient, doing more with less, all those things, which then decrease quality of life. And so people leave, and
Mm.
that decreases profitability even more, or they're not quite as happy, or they're not doing the same things to kind of generate the same levels of revenue. And then at some point, they'll start to hopefully, likely start to sell off those practices too, to then
Mm.
again kind of maintain that profitability to be able to sell to somebody. So kind of those are some of the characteristics we tend to see in the consolidation world of other industries, and then they kind of will tend to level out, or they'll start to sell back to independent ownerships, or those that were dissatisfied will go out and start their own, so they'll kind of be this new crop of independents come out, kind of a different structure. And I think we're kind of somewhere in that range right now.
Mm.
Um, and again, I think independent looks different than a lot of those practices that did get bought. Those big 4 doctor practices with all the hospitals and all the services, that with lots of overhead. They're hard to run, and they're hard to maintain, and people finding kind of niche services, whether it is like Carrie just doing dental stuff. I think we're going to start to see that, or urgent care is starting, to be a
Mm-hmm.
thing even more. And so it's not just your hospital that does GP all day, every day, seeing walk-ins. Now there is a specific clinic, just like there is similar in the human model. So I think we'll start to see, and there'll be some level of balance that starts to equilibrium within the marketplace. And people will find the practices that, there are those that want to be employees for bigger groups.
Right.
The bigger groups that are going to, continue to maintain a good work culture, and run their practices appropriately and kind of have long-term vision. Those are the ones I think that will be successful in the end, versus those that are just looking to get flipped and bought.
Right.
I think they're going to make decisions in the short term that will ultimately affect, kind of boots on the ground that will not be as profitable in the long run. So I think if the businesses are just like if you look at Jim Collins' work and Built to Last and the decisions that are being made, with long-term vision and long-term success, those aren't always the same decisions that if you're looking for short-term return, you don't always make the same call. And so the ones that will still be standing in years to come will likely be those that are making those more long-term, people-focused decisions, not just profit-focused.
Yeah, that's really interesting because we're sort of under the, like when we talk about this stuff, we're kind of under the assumption that it, we're always taught like better medicine is profitable, right? And and if you have people who are willing to stay in the business for a longer period of time, then you don't have to worry about like the expensive turnover and all that kind of stuff. But like those are more long-term problems, not necessarily short-term problems. Like if you can kick that problem down the road a little bit, then you can sell before it's ever an issue. Right? If it's like if you're dealing with like a short-term thing. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if that is also related because even these bigger companies that, and I don't know too much about this, but I know that like some companies, let's say, they have private equity investors that there is a financial cycle associated with that. So it's like every then X number of years or every financial goal meeting or whatever, where it's like you have X amount of profit or I don't know. At that time, then a financial event occurs, and then the stake gets sold to like a different person, or you now have a new investor relationship, right?
Yeah. The baton kind of gets passed, and that's that again, bigger fish getting bought by bigger fish.
Yeah, because then it's like even if it is the same company, quote unquote, and it's not even necessarily like changing the name of the company, the private equity that is contributing to it is a different one. Therefore, you have to like look good on the books, right? Like it still then becomes, yes, it's a company with like long-term vision, but then you have like a competing interest of the short-term financial cycle.
Right. And then they still have, a big stake. And so they're going to want to have a say in the things that they care about may be different. And I think that's where a lot of the fatigue comes through. It's like, all right, say team member stayed through from the independent ownership into, the first private equity group behind this group's name. And then that
Right.
sells to somebody else. And now you care about all these other metrics that maybe you didn't care about before. And I think there's a fatigue that starts to come with that a lot of times. And so it's like you can do it once, you can shift, but then the change of having to do this multiple times, like, okay, this is what we care about now. Okay, what game are we playing this month?
Right.
Relative to
Yeah.
performance of what do the investors care about. I think some level of fatigue, and I think that's where people start to get burnout of like, okay, we just changed all this to make these people happy, and ultimately those aren't the people you're trying to make happy. The people you're trying to make happy are the clients coming through the door, and so I think the team member fatigue starts to come in when it's like, what are we playing for? Changes, that moving target creates a fatigue, and so and the good management structures and the ones that will do a good job will be the ones that kind of protect their boots on the ground people from, shield them from a lot of those kind of investor related changes, and do it in a way that is very palatable and very strong change management skills versus just like, oh, okay, this new group cares about this, so we got to change everything to make sure that metric is getting hit, because all the other businesses in their portfolio get measured on this, and so
That's interesting. That also opens up it opens up a possible consultation model where like you could imagine that there's like this middle structure thing where you just like insert it in during these periods where you're like, all right, like figure out what truly the orders are from top down and like why those orders exist. Try to modify as much as we can into this, and you're effectively like a
project manager, change manager.
Yeah, exactly. And hostage negotiator.
It is, and it's fascinating. At one point, we were doing when I was at the bank, some big projects, and I started doing a lot of research on change management. It is a whole body of work unto itself.
I'm sure.
And like the things that you need to be thinking about and communicating, and how many times you have to say it. I think that was the biggest thing. I was like, oh my gosh, it's like you think you make this one big corporate announcement and we're good, and it's like you have to repeatedly, to kind of get adoption and belief and and engagement. It was a lot more effort and energy than I was shocked how much effort it took for like smaller stuff, just the change management process and the communication, and how many times, you have to say things for it to really, really stick. And so often it's
Right.
like, we made the announcement, of course we're good. Just like, no, that's the
Yeah.
beginning. And you got to say
Sure.
it and do it more.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just like in a relationship where you're like, we already talked about this, so you have no right to be offended.
yeah, yeah. They're like, why are they not doing this thing I asked them to do? You
Right,
said it once.
exactly.
Uh,
Right.
it's a behavioral change. So, and
Huh.
again, that's where, um, and it's hard, especially I think that's to me that disconnect we were talking about earlier of like from corporate life to boots on the ground, like in the clinic life of like you are not when you're in the clinic, you're not thinking about those things, you're not looking at those things. You are so
Mhm.
like, what is the fire in front of me, and how do we, put it out, and how are we taking care of the thing that's right in front of you? And so to like, those are two different parts of your brains to then like shift
Right.
gears and like think about like bigger management. You're just like trying to do the thing, and you forgot to see the email that said we don't use this drug anymore. This is the new protocol, and like
Right.
you're trying to do it efficiently, and so you kind of rely on the patterns and the habits that you formed already, and then it becomes frustrating to have to, in the midst of, three other patients, have to learn this new thing that slows you down, and you're trying to accomplish, you're trying to meet your metrics that they have, but now you've had to slow
Right.
down to do it the way they want you to do it, and that then is throwing off other metrics. So it's so
Yeah.
a frustrating cycle, um, you know, in that kind of environment. But it so I don't know what the answer is. Again, I'm just a couple months into kind of this being on the other side, um, of that. But like you said about the profession, and that this is not the first time this has happened. Actually, it's kind of surprising how late in the game veterinary medicine, because dental went through this, the death care industry went through this,
Right.
several other industries, pharmacies gone through it. Um, that we were a little late to the game. So, all those are still standing, and all of those still have independent ownership. um,
Right.
so I have no fear that, veterinary medicine, it will be different, and there'll be a different percentage than it was before. And there'll be different characteristics and different things that you're, wanting to gain for working for one versus the other. Um, but it is what it is. But I think also a piece that people forget is that, by and large, the people that benefited from these corporates um, purchasing these clinics were also veterinarians too. So
Mm.
that was also the amount of wealth that was created within our profession in a positive way, for veterinarians that didn't, those just were game changing figures for those veterinarian families that,
Right.
likely their exit strategy um, was not going to be that significant. And so,
Yeah.
as good or bad, if as people want to think about it, have been a lot of veterinarians that families' lives have been, trajectories have been very changed for the better, as a result of that level of money coming into our profession too. So it's just finding the balance of all of those things. I mean,
Yeah,
and
I remember even when I was in school, when they were talking, even when I was in school, which was not that long ago, uh, but when they were talking about like businesses and basically selling a practice and buying a practice and all that kind of stuff, and it's like oftentimes, especially at that point, like people would sort of value their practice. They'd be like, "Oh yeah, this is my retirement strategy," and like obviously I'm going to get like some large amount of money, and like you go into the financials of it, it's like it's not worth anything. Like it's barely worth a couple $100,000 to like buy this thing. Um, yeah, so then you have all of these retiring veterinarians who have put an entire lifetime into building this, who don't really have an exit strategy anymore. So yeah, I mean, this is a different thing now. I mean, buying these practices up, getting some money and being able to retire is like a pretty beneficial thing for these guys.
and for your kid, I mean, the sums of money we're talking about were, I mean, unheard of when most of these people probably bought their practice, and
Mm,
and that's
mhm.
a, an amazing thing that we had that outlet, and now that trajectory as well for people, that do want to sell. And so I think it's finding the balance of everybody kind of finding their place, and within the profession and what floats their boat, and because I think there's a place for both. and both
Yeah.
drive, both have really good pros and really good cons, or not really good, but have cons, strong cons.
Really great cons.
So
Just
just finding,
fantastic.
and different
Heartwarming
people will
cons.
find those at different points in their career. I think that's important because, by and large, corporate's probably going to have better training. And so somebody coming out of um, school might find, right out of the gate that a bigger group might be better to kind of mentorship. You have a whole network of people, but then you want to have a community feel and have a little more hands-on and personal, and then you switch over to a private practice. Then
Yeah.
at some point you might need bigger, better benefits, or want to be able to travel and do kind of um, work within a network or go different places, and being a part of a bigger network again would benefit you based off your life stage at that point. Like, yes, all of those things are possible within this profession.
Yeah.
It's not all one or all the other. Now we have options, and I think that ultimately is a benefit as well. So I think there's some leveling that needs to happen. Again, pendulum of, like, again, we were in the hungry hippo phase last like
Mm-hmm.
7
Yeah.
8 years, and then COVID just even kind of flustered it even more.
Right.
So
Right.
I think there'll be some leveling out where people will find where they belong, and where you know those that may have wanted to buy practices have come far enough along that maybe they could have bought a practice 3 to 5 years out, but now that wasn't an option, so now they're 7 to 10 years out. Well, guess what? That's
Mm.
7 to 10 years that you've learned, you've saved. You can now go start a practice that it may not have been your initial plan, but you've gained enough experience, you've gained enough of a down payment to now go do that, even though that might not
Right.
have been your original trajectory. It could be now,
Right.
and that practice might look different than what you thought it was going to be. Of maybe you don't want that behemoth for practice doctor practice. Maybe it looks a little bit different now. So
Yeah.
those different service models are evolving and emerging, and I think that's all good. I think at the end of the day, pet owners are going to benefit from a little more segmentation than we originally had, and everybody will find their niche in that, especially with spectrum of care. I think as care has continued to improve, gold standard, and the upper levels of that, there's still a whole lot of pets that just need access to care, and so all of us recognizing the value of both, um,
Mm.
that
Mm-hmm.
that we can all exist together, that both matter, and that there are pet owners out there that need all of it, and there's different models to achieve all those different things,
Yeah.
and respecting that one is neither right nor wrong as long as you're practicing a standard of care
Yeah.
and ethics,
Hmm.
the basics, those things, illegal. As long as we're in those, and pets are getting cared for, and people, I think that stat
Wow.
is out there of like less than over 50% of American pets won't see a vet on an annual basis.
Sure.
So that's a thing.
I mean, the only reason that mine do is because I am one. Like, I went to go fill out a license. Like, we have to get pet licenses in the state
Mhm.
of, or in this the city of Fort Collins, and I can't get one for Callie because her rabies is out of date apparently. So, whoops.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mamma mia. Um. Okay. Yeah. Like I said before, we could talk. We
Yeah.
could do this for.
Any particular pieces you want to follow up on that you would edit back into a segment we talked about earlier?
No, I like. I am curious about some of these like specific ideas, like the mastery, connection, growth,
I need to
relatedness,
look that
growth.
up. I
Like,
feel like I don't think that was the right one. Oh, it's autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
and purpose.
I was like, mastery and growth are still a lot alike. Yeah, autonomy.
Well, now I gotta splice this in. But, like, no, I one thing that I don't know if I forget what episode it was. I think it was Will's, where it was like technical difficulties. I had I kept having them. I'm like, if only we had like just like a thing, like the old TV
Oh, I
shows where it'd be
loved
like
that so much. Your voice. And then do you write your own? Does each person get like their own intro that
Yeah.
you record? Okay.
All the music's mine. It's all original.
But it's
So
custom to the person.
it is semi-custom to the person. I mean, there's only so much that I can do from that side. So like I'll record a bunch of things and then like go through them. And then as I'm like, this doesn't really fit this person and this
Okay.
doesn't really fit this part. And then, so it's quasi customizable.
Got it.
I wonder if I'm going to include like banjos and synthesizers and just a heavy percussion section or something at some point. We'll see what happens. But anyway, so if I want to like splice this in, I can do it however I want. I can just be like, well, all right, hold on a second. So as it turns out, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Every time she says mastery, connection, and growth, it's indeed autonomy, mastery, and purpose. I'll just keep splicing it in.
It's been a while since I've touched on those things.
Like we talked about before, we could talk forever. So I'm going to stop us. I'll just invite you back. We'll just do like every third episode. You'll just show up. We'll just talk for another 3 hours.
That's a great way to spend an afternoon. We would have had this conversation anyway, so we might as well let other people enjoy it.
Yeah, just record it. Other people can listen in. They can give some feedback. That's what I'm hoping to do. And what I hope is that this podcast just ends up devolving into just me having conversations with random friends. And on the podcast today is my friend Jason from high school. He has a dog. So Jason, well, thank you again. And until next time. This was great. I had a lot of fun.
Hopefully there's some stuff there.
And that was my conversation with Jess Trichel. There's, like I said, there's a lot there. And Jess has been a very valuable part of, really, when I look around and I look at people who are on, high up in Nationwide and Suveto and, just kind of all around, I see somebody who was at some point influenced by Jess, which is pretty amazing. I mean, it's, I guess that's the benefit of being in a position to kind of cast a wide net. But she's somebody who also, she would go out and do her networking and do her talks and all of that. But she also is somebody who likes to connect to people. And so when out on the road and when encountering all these individuals over and over again, she connected with them. So I do think that she really does have it's like she's woven into the fabric of a lot of what is going on right now, just one way or the other, which is kind of neat. It also makes me feel not special. So, all right, Jess, that's it. We're not friends anymore. I only accept friends who have no other friends. So they need me. You know what I mean? I think that, she definitely has I find us talking a lot on this podcast about things that, we can philosophize about and that we're personally affected by, but that we don't necessarily have all angles about, the subject. So it's really nice to talk to somebody who has more than one perspective on this, who has had multiple experiences within different aspects of, this industry. And, Jess is one of the very few people who fits that. So, and she's also a bit of a dreamer and, but still like a horse gal who grew up roping cows and stuff. So it's just, there's like a lot to the person who is Jess Trichel. If, she's not on the road anymore, but if you happen to ever run into her, I'm sure she would be happy to let you buy her a drink. I'm not all right, Jess, I'm not going to make you buy drinks for all these strangers, but if they ask, I guess, I put them up to it. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this. Thank you again for listening. If you haven't already, please share to basically everyone that you know. But most importantly, if you don't mind, just shoot me an email or something. All my my contact information is on the website. But if you have any comments or questions, or if you have any specific questions of any of the people that I've talked to, I mean, just shoot that to me, and I would be happy to kind of comment on that in an episode in the future. So thank you again, thegreatestprofession.com. So with all that said, may all of your continuing education lectures actually be interesting, relevant, and useful. That would be fantastic. Thanks, guys.